Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for all of you. Thank you very much for being with us today, November 27th. We have completed 25 years of the 25th and for the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and the numbers from United Nations show how important and how current this situation is, because at the moment we continue losing the battle to reduce the violence against women and girls. While the world is turning into authoritarianism, what we have found that is urgent is to continue demonstrating that violence, gender-based violence destroys life in cruelty. As Pax Christi International, as the Extractive task group, we will continue working on a justice for women, for their dignity, for all of us, because that should be echoed in the work that we develop. Well, today we start our last webinar from the 7th that we were committed at the beginning of this year. I would like to share with you some ideas that came up for why we are working on about these transitions, and why we are talking about needing hope in terms of transition to life in harmony. Today, in our last webinar, we have the presence of Amanda Romero, researcher who has facilitated gathering a lot of information of the things that have been developed in the last 10 years, and actually the third year, which is the last phase of the program, Latin America Between Violences and Hope. There have been many allied members who have been working together with us, and those of us that work in the section of extractivism. We have accepted the suggestion that this dialogue can be included this year for the challenges of building peace from the socio-ecological transitions in Latin America and the Caribbean, with two commenters, experts in the theme, but also very close to the communities that are suffering these challenges and that are resisting in a assertive manner to these extractives, and that are also thinking about transitions from a perspective of a socio-ecological and fair democratic approach. Father Dário Bossi, who is a Comboni a priest, and I'd like to tell you a little bit of context about this. Remember that we met as a task group on extractivism in Panama to begin to think about what the things that we have advanced in these last 3 years, and to listen to us, and to plan what we wanted to have for our next steps or steps ahead with Pax Christi, with the KA, with Australia, from the United States too, and the Franciscan mission in Germany. And so we were in Panama celebrating and praying and reflecting and exchanging a lot of important conversations, and we came up with the idea that we should continue working with 7 webinars to begin to knit hope in terms that we have been imposed a transition model that is not the one that we really need, and that continues to be the same thing that we have seen before. So in these 7 webinars, we had divided into 3 groups. Just to tell you quickly that these 3 big groups are going to constitute part of a program that we are implementing, and that we are going to be sharing bilaterals and in groups, sharing with all of our allies and our co-parts. And the objectives for this webinar was, on one hand, to give visibility to the communities that integrate the task group, that are resisting, are building from a non-violence, active but non-violence approach. Second is to strengthen the capacity for analysis and tools for the defense of the territory, and also trying to look into special expert people for each one of the webinars, and the voices of those communities. And the third one was to promote actions of solidarity towards the communities that have been affected. And this has been reflected on the contribution of to many of the campaigns, that announces and on the topics of the strategic litigation, accompanying with community food provision and other initiatives. And so we have been working on the socio-ecological transition between August and April, April and August. Then we moved into the peace building and active non-violence. We came from COP on biodiversity in Cali, and that includes this issue of constructing paths with nature. Then that was devoted basically in May and September. So very alternatives and extractives, etc. And the last topic was business and human rights in July and October, and now and today. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite Alejandro, my colleague, who is going to facilitate this process for conversation. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Marta Inés,
Thank you very much,
por esa
Martínez,
primera
for
introducción, por
this
este
first
contexto.
introduction, for the context you provided,
Queremos
and we would like
entonces
to
dar paso a la
go ahead with the
presentación
presentation
de la investigación. Le voy a dar
the
entonces
research
la palabra
presentation.
a Amanda
So
Romero.
the
Ella
floor is
es
now for Amanda
autora,
Romero. She's
miembro
a
fundadora del
PhD,
Movimiento del
founding member
Descuarto en
of the
Colombia
Movement of
y
Human Rights in
trabaja más
Colombia, and
profundamente en
she's
la
been working
perspectiva
deeply in the
decolonial de los pueblos
decolonization
indígenas y
perspective of the colonial
afrodescendientes, las
and
empresas y los
Afro-descendant
derechos humanos y
peoples,
la
business and human
construcción de
rights,
paz.
and the
Se
peace building.
desempeñó como
She has
miembro del
been
Comité
working, she
Asesor
worked
de
as
organizaciones de
a
la
support
sociedad civil
counselor for
en
the
Nueva York y del Comité
PNUD in New
Asesor de
York
la
and
Fundación
the
Protector y
supporting
el Fondo
Appleton
para la No
and the Fund
Violencia
for
de Santa
Nonviolence
Cruz.
from Santa Cruz.
Durante los últimos 13 años
For
y
the
hasta
last
el
13 years,
2023,
up
Amanda
to
fue investigadora
2023,
senior
she was
representante
senior
para América
researcher and
Latina
representative for Latin America, for
para
the South
América
America,
del Sur
for the
del Centro de Información sobre
Business and Human Rights
Derechos
Resource
Humanos,
Center.
una ONG con sede en
It's an
Londres, Nueva
NGO that
York,
is based in
Berlín y
London, New
Bogotá.
York, Berlin, and
Amanda
Bogota.
tiene un doctorado
Amanda
en
has a
educación, una
PhD in
maestría en
education and
desarrollo
MA
educativo y social y es
develop,
especialista en
socio-economical
derechos humanos
development.
de la
She's a specialist
Fundación
in human rights
Canadiense
from the
de
Canadian
Derechos
Institute of
Humanos y el
Human Rights
Instituto de
and the
Estudios
Institute of
Sociales de La
Institutes
Haya.
of
También es
Social
docente
Studies
de la
in
maestría en
The
Derechos
Hague.
Humanos,
She is
gestión
a
de la
teacher in human
transición y
rights in
posconflicto en el
transition and
SAP en
post-conflict in
Colombia,
ISAP in Colombia,
donde
where
imparte
she is
nuevos
the
escenarios
professor
institucionales y
talking
temas para la
about new
gestión de los
scenarios
asuntos públicos
and
como cátedra. Con
as a
este
teacher of transitions,
preámbulo y
also in terms of
reconocimiento a una
the
enorme carrera de
transitions
trabajo, le damos la bienvenida
elements
entonces a
in
Amanda
contemplating
Romero
transitions
para que nos
and the inclusion of these topics
comparta la
in Colombia.
investigación.
So
Adelante, Amanda.
Amanda is now going to share
Muchísimas
the
gracias
information
y muy buen
about the
día para
research.
todas y todos.
Thank you very
Para
much
mí
to
es un gran
all of
placer estar
you.
con
For me, it's
ustedes
a
hoy
great
día
pleasure to be
en
with you.
celebración de
This
conmemoración de
the
la lucha de las
commemoration
mujeres de
of
América
fights of
Latina y
women
del
in Latin
mundo
America
en
and the
contra de
world
todas las formas de
against
violencia.
all sorts of
En
violence.
relación
Yeah,
con la
in
pregunta
relation
de la
to the
investigación que
question of
gentilmente me
the question
encargó
and
Pax
research
Christi
that
International,
currently Pax Christi
me
asked me to
quería
develop,
responder hoy
I
día
wanted
en esta breve
to
presentación de
reply in this
últimos un
brief
poco relacionar
report
el tema
a
de
little bit
construcción de
about
la
how to
paz
relate
y
the
la
peace
cuestión de las
building
transiciones
and the issue of
socioecológicas en América
socio-ecological
Latina y el
transitions in
Caribe desde la
Latin America and the
perspectiva
Caribbean from
del
a perspective
trabajo que
of
hace este
the work
grupo
that
sobre
this task
extractivas en
group is
América
doing
Latina
on
y el Caribe.
extractives in
En
Latin
primer
America and
lugar,
the Caribbean.
entonces,
The
podemos
first thing I'd like
señalar
to tell you
que
is that we
una
can have
mirada desde el movimiento
uh,
de paz
from the
católico nos
Catholic
llevó
Peace
a
movement
discutir y
took us to
reflexionar no
discuss and
solamente los
reflect
marcos
upon not
jurídicos que
only the
soportan el tema
legal
de las
framework that are
transiciones,
supporting this issue of
transición
the transitions,
energética,
energetic
lo que ha
transition,
dicho el Papa
what
Francisco
Pope
en su
Francis has
encíclica
said in
Laudato
says in
Si
encyclical
y en dos
Laudato
de
Si,
sus
and in
documentos
two of the
apostólicos,
documents,
sino también
but
mirar
also
cómo
to
el Santo
see
Padre hace
how
un
the
llamado
Holy
hacia lo
Father
que él
has been
denomina la
calling for what is
educación y la
called
espiritualidad
ecological and
ecológica,
spiritual
comenzando por los
education,
cambios
beginning with the
hacia
changes
otro estilo
towards
de
other
vida y
lifestyles,
particularmente
in
señala
particular with
acciones austeras
austere
críticas
actions
a lo que
critical
él
to the
denomina
obsessive
consumismo
consumism
obsesivo,
that is the
que es, según
reflection
él, el
of
reflejo
according to him,
subjetivo
the
del paradigma tecnoeconómico que opera
of
por el
the
concepto del
technological paradigm
racionalismo, de la
because of the
producción de
rationalism
objetos
production
inútiles
of the
se
production of
con el
useless
desperdicio
objects
consiguiente, la acumulación
with the
y el
waste accumulation
distanciamiento
and
de la
distancing
naturaleza
from
y lo
nature
que el
and
padre,
from
el
what
Papa
the Pope
Francisco
has
denomina
Francis says
la casa
is
común,
called
el
the common
planeta
home,
Tierra.
the planet
Cuando
Earth.
encontramos
When we
situaciones
find
específicas en
specific
las que
situations
estamos
in which
viendo que es
we begin to see
necesario
that
y
there
a
is
nivel mundial se va
at the world level,
construyendo
we are beginning to build a criticism of the development model, capitalism, neoliberal model that has been based on extractivism of natural goods, as our indigenous people said, and but also because they are particularly interested in mass extraction. It is a wild capitalism that makes us remember of the first of the beginnings of capitalism at the end of the 19th and in the beginning of the 20th century, because it also has to do with the intensity that where simultaneously at the world level they are extracting mineral resources, oil resources, lumber, and everything to help what they call the virgin zones, where supposedly indigenous peoples and rural communities don't know how to use and exploit the richness and the wealth, converting or transforming these green zones into, which is a very interesting patriarchal term, in what the Chileans call sacrifice zones. Of course, when you talk about sacrifice zones, can take us to a different connotation of and resistance situations. But when you're thinking about knitting hope, we have found that there are different discourses on the transition. What the research tried to do was to discuss these discourses based on this chart that was presented by Professor Arturo Escobar, who points out how in the global north, the terminology where they are describing the transition terms are based on the concept of the building or growth, like for example, from different perspectives. For example, the ecological the Buddhist ecology, which talk about the Great Shift, the Great Initiative on Transition by Toulouse, the great work done by the Ecozoic, by the theologist Thomas Barry in sustentation and relocalization, the interreligious dialogue that are presented, interfaith and interreligious, and the different the environmental work with the United Nations, and particularly one that has to do with climate change and with the different conventions of the parts, both on the biodiversity agreement as well as the CBD, which are documents that came as a result of the summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, and the criticism to anthropocene as presented as the philosopher presented by the philosopher Harari. This build of development is contrasted with the different discourses in the South Globe which is called the post-extractivism. So there are narratives that are being developed not after extractivism, but precisely against or as alternatives to extractivism, that recognize that there is a civilizatory model as presented by Enrique Les in Mexico, that also proposes transitions towards a post-extractivism based on the good living as presented by Eduardo Gudinas, Arturo Escobar, among the most important ones, and the whole cosmology of the Andean people that are trying to re-communalize, to go back to the common things, to the social life and ecological life of the communities. In Latin America, we are seeing also the importance of the relationality, what we call in the human rights the interrelation and interdivisibility of human rights and their interdependence. In that manner, Arturo Escobar tells us, with Walter Mignano and other authors and the colonial authors, of a universe, not a unification or unilateralism, of not a universalism, as mentioned by Professor Santiago Gomez, but universality of principles. That is, that the protection principles of care for nature and of human rights, human beings in nature should be for everybody. And both narratives get together in the same idea of post growth, or a criticism to this unmeasurable growth of the capitalism, of neoliberal capitalism. But so what is also called a criticism to that concept of development, which also gives place to the, or is based, or it's rooted on this activism of extractivism. So the idea of the contrary to the growth is an idea that is marked by the virtual circle of R, the 8 R's that talks about, mentioned in Laudato Si by Pope Francis: recycling, reevaluate, reconceptualize, restructure, relocate, redistribute, reduce, and reuse. This also allows us to begin to get into a new decade in the 21st century, with the possibility of interreligious dialogue, with the construction of new narratives in the global north, but also with debates around the instruments of international instruments of environmental protection for the planet, as the COP 16 on biodiversity, which we have just had in Cali. Pax Christi had a participation in Cali, in Colombia, and COP 29 on climate change, which took place in Azerbaijan, with a lot of criticism and very little advancements, which have also suggested if it is necessary to change that model of the COPs, and what else to do for the planet. When you ask about these ideas and this strong criticism, we need to acknowledge the fact that there are activism for transition. Those activisms are worldwide. They are getting more and more a global character, that they have to be more and more articulated, because that's what gives them a possibility to construct hope, and through the North-South dialogues and through the recuperation of the voices of the communities that are being affected, and especially because that is what really constitutes, from a ontologic perspective, the subjects in that rationality that we are mentioning, in that particular interdependence, and in then relational view to what affects a specific country, like for example Haiti, that affects everybody. Particularly taking into account that the growth of the level of the sea can end up with the lives in all the insular countries, not only in Latin America but in the world. Within those activism, we are also facing poverty situations that make it very clear that it is urgent to unite efforts for common alternatives. Santiago Castro Gomez says that we should try to have an emancipatory fight that is not the one that renounces universality, with the argument that all universality is Eurocentric or colonialist. And on the contrary, he says that we should continue to reject that Eurocentric universalism of North America, in the name of a political universality, just one model of government, one model of having democracy, because he knows that its ultimate objective is a fight against inequality and domination, wherever that may be manifested. This sense, for example, in this universality that fights against universalism, is what allows us to continue with the common fight in relation to the energetic transitions. For that reason, this document at the end, after having an explanation, a detailed explanation of the different momenta and the different fights, presents a series of recommendations to the ecclesial-based movements for the care of the creation, regarding extractivisms that are not only talking about the limber, the chopping trips,
para
and oil production,
transformar el
and to transform
paisaje,
the
degradar el
landscape and
suelo
to
para
degrade
extraer
the
más
soil, to
recursos
extract
de
more resources
hidrocarburos,
and
nos
oil
planteamos en
resources.
primer lugar
What
que los
we are suggesting is
movimientos
that
como el
the
movimiento
base
por la paz
movements
de
like
Pax
the
Christi
movement for
deben
peace in Pax Christi
identificar
has to
los
identify
principales
the
problemas
main
que son
problems that are
conexos con la
connected
crisis
with the
climática
climate
que se
crisis
viven a
that
nivel
are
territorial y
being
local
experienced at the
y
territorial
su
and local
relación
levels,
con entornos
and
más
the
grandes
relation
como
with
en el caso
other
ecuatoriano
wider
la
environments, like in
provincia,
the
en el
case of
caso
the
brasilero y
provinces,
mexicano el
and in
estado, en el
Mexico
caso
and
colombiano y
Brazil state,
peruano los
and
departamentos del
in Peru
país,
and Colombia, the
para
departments of the
elaborar
country,
un análisis
to
de sus
develop
causas, los actores
analysis of the causes,
responsables, sin
who are
olvidar
the
el actor
responsible
económico,
actors,
es decir, las
of course,
empresas,
the business
las
actors too,
soluciones
the solutions and
provisionales que
provisional
deben
solutions that
proponer
can
las
be proposed and
organizaciones de
promoted
base
in
y
the work with
promover
the
un trabajo
network of
en red
organizations
con otras
with
organizaciones con
experience in the
experiencia en
strategic
litigio
litigation
estratégico que
that
puedan
can
apoyar un plan de
help
acción con visión de
support an action
futuro.
plan with a vision of the
Al
future.
mismo tiempo,
At the
las
same time, we
organizaciones
would like
sociales,
to
sindicales, indígenas de mujeres,
civil society
debemos
and women
invitar a las
organizations have to
niñas y
invite
los jóvenes,
young
a las
people,
niñas y
the
los
girls
niños,
and boys,
a sesiones de
to train
formación
sessions
y
and
diálogo de
dialogue
saberes
of
con las de mayor
knowledges
edad
with the
en la
elder
comunidad,
in the
con el
community,
fin de
with the purpose
aprender
of
cómo
learning
vivir
how they
antes de
used to
exigir
live
tanto
before
consumismo.
so much
¿Qué
consumism
propuestas
existed, what
conjuntas pueden
specific
hacer? Y a
joint
partir de
proposals they
allí
can present,
realizar
and from
acciones
there to
para
begin
abordar
to
la
implement
crisis
actions
climática.
to address the climate crisis.
En memoria de
In
Berta
memoriam
Cáceres,
of Berta Cáceres,
continuamos
we
entonces con
continue
estas
also with these
recomendaciones a los
recommendations
movimientos de
to
base
the ecclesial
eclesial
based
por el
movements
cuidado de la
for the
creación.
care of the
En
creation.
primer lugar,
The
es
first
muy
point
importante,
is
no
to
solamente porque
not
hoy se
only
conmemora, o en esta
because
semana
today
se
or this
conmemora
week we are
la
commemorating
no violencia contra la mujer,
the
pero
non-violence
debemos
against women,
discutir
but also we need to
los
discuss
sesgos de género
the
presentes en
gender
las comunidades
biases
eclesiales
that are presented
que
in the
desde
ecclesial
visiones
communities
patriarcales
that from
impiden
patriarchal
valorar
visions
el papel que
don't
las
allow
mujeres y
to
los hombres deben
assess
jugar
and
en la
value the role
economía
of
del
women and
cuidado,
men have to play in
introduciendo
the
cambios
economy
en
of
las
care,
prácticas
introducing
cotidianas
changes
que
in
dignifiquen la
daily
labor de las mujeres y
practices
las
that
niñas y
dignify
niños
the
en el
work of
respeto por
women
la
and girls and
creación.
boys in the respect for the
Por otro
creation.
lado,
On the other hand,
formular
we
sus
need to
propias
present their
prioridades derivadas
own
de una reflexión
priorities derived from
concienzuda
a
sobre el
consensus
análisis de
reflection
contexto,
on the
los
context
actores, y
analysis, the
repito,
actors, of course,
empresariales,
it could be
también
business,
estatales e
state, and intergovernmental
intergubernamentales, y
actors,
de las
and the possibility
posibilidades
to reach
reales para alcanzar
real
el acceso a
access
la
to
justicia,
justice,
el
to
derecho al agua y al
water, the right
territorio
to territory
como derechos
as human
humanos,
rights,
y
and
emprender acciones
to
legales y
start legal
extralegales,
actions and
como son
extra-legal
las
actions, as are the
movilizaciones,
mobilizations,
las actividades
the
artísticas y todas
artistic
aquellas
activities,
que nos
and
permitan
those activities that
plantear que
allow
aquí
us to
estamos, que
say that we are
tenemos una
here,
voz y
that
que
we have a voice,
necesitamos
and that
cambiar
we
el
need to
estado de
change
cosas
the state of
tan
things
catastrófico que estamos
so
viviendo.
catastrophic that we are
En
experiencing at the
tercer
moment.
lugar,
In the third
frente
place,
a las
regarding
catástrofes que causa
the
el
catastrophes caused
extractivismo,
by extractivism,
tenemos que
we
monitorear
need
y
to
evaluar
monitor and
las
assess
acciones que
the
desarrolla la
different
propia
actions developed by
comunidad
the communities
para
to
identificar las
identify
dificultades,
the
los
difficulties that they have
vacíos,
found or the
las
gaps
tragedias
or the tragedies
encontradas ya en los proyectos
in
realizados
the
por las
projects that have
empresas
been
o los
developed by
estados,
businesses, by the states,
las medidas de
and the
mejora que deben
measures that have to be
implementarse y
implemented
las
and the
metodologías
methodologies
propias de las
in
comunidades
with
con
by,
miras a la
with
justicia
the purpose of
climática,
looking
la
for climate
mitigación y
justice,
adecuación a la
mitigation and
crisis
adequation
climática
to the
para
climate crisis
prevenir
to
pérdidas
prevent
irremediables.
irremediable
Y por
losses.
último,
Finally,
introducir,
to introduce,
fortalecer y
strengthen,
compartir
and
las
share
experiencias
the
de cuidado de la
experiences of
creación
care with the creation
fundadas en las
funded on
orientaciones
the
papales,
Pope's
implementadas
orientations
tanto en
implemented in
sectores
rural
rurales como
sectors
urbano
and
marginales de
urban
América Latina y el Caribe,
marginalized sectors in Latin America
tales
and the
como
Caribbean,
las
such as the
asociaciones y grupos
associations and
ambientales,
environmental groups,
las
the
cooperativas, los
cooperatives,
sistemas
and
de
the exchange
intercambio,
systems
trueque y
and
otras
other
formas de
forms of
reciprocidad comunitaria
community
que no
reciprocity
hacen parte del
that are not
mercado,
part of the market,
empleando o
using or
aumentando las
increasing
que
the ones that are
actualmente
already
se
being taking
efectúan en
place
otros lugares,
in other
como
places
carnavales
as
por el
carnivals
agua,
for the
por la
water,
vida,
for life,
intercambios de
exchange of
semillas,
seeds,
mercados campesinos e
peasants
indígenas
markets and
y
indigenous markets,
afrodescendientes,
Afro-descendant
siembra y
markets,
cosecha de etcétera,
planting
para
and plowing of
un
food in collective
cuestionamiento desde
to
abajo,
reconstruct a
planteado desde lo que el Papa
multilateralism
Francisco
bottom up,
llamaba en su
as
exhortación
what
Laudate
Pope Francis
Si.
mentioned in the exhortation Laudate
Pero
Dem.
también queremos
But
hacer en
also,
el
we'd like
documento
to
una
include in the
serie de
document a
llamados a
series
la
of
Iglesia
calls
latinoamericana
to
y
the Latin
caribeña.
American and
En
Caribbean
primer
church.
lugar,
In the first place,
valoramos que
that we
exista ya
value the
en
creation
algunas
of some of
conferencias
the
episcopales
Catholic Episcopal
católicas de la
conferences in the
región
region that are
unas
commissions or
comisiones o
pastorals
pastorales que
that
se
are
han creado
specialized in
con
the
la
analysis and
especificidad
the
del
development of
análisis y
proposals from the
elaboración de
integral
propuestas desde
ecology.
la ecología integral e invitar a que
And also
otras
invite others to
conferencias
incorporate
episcopales
into these
las
practices
incorporen
at a
para que a
level
nivel
of
de parroquias y
parishes and
diócesis se
dioceses.
instituyan
They can
escenarios y se
institute
aborden la cuestión
scenarios
de la
that can
crisis ambiental,
address the issues of
las
the environmental
alternativas y
crisis,
los
the
planes de
alternatives and the
ahorro de
plans
energía,
for energy
como
saving,
está sufriendo
as
actualmente
we're
Ecuador,
suffering now,
de
Ecuador,
transformación de
and the
hábitos de consumo,
transforming
por ejemplo,
consumption
de
habits,
los
for
objetos de
example,
oro
of
que
the
se
gold
utilizan en las
objects that
iglesias,
are
cómo
being used
transformar
in
esos
churches,
hábitos de
how to transform
consumo y
these
la conversión
elements and the
ecológica
ecological
iniciada
conversion
por el Santo Padre
mentioned by the
para
Holy
actuar
Father
en
to
responsabilidad con los
act
entornos
responsibly with
naturales.
natural environments.
En segundo
In the
lugar,
second place,
valorar que
we
algunas
value that some
instituciones de las
constitutions
órdenes
of religious
religiosas
orders,
femeninas y masculinas
female and
ya
male,
han
have already
incorporado una
incorporated a
sección
specific
dedicada al
section
cuidado de la creación,
dedicated to the careful
reforzando el
creation,
carisma para
reinforcing
orientarlo hacia la
charisma to
promoción,
orient it
el
to the
apoyo y la
promotion, the
formación de
support, and
liderazgos
the
eclesiales capaces de
leadership
acompañar de manera
that are
informada y con
of the
conciencia
church that
ecológica
can
a
accompany
las
in an
comunidades con
informed
las que
manner and with
realizan su
ecological
labor
awareness
pastoral
of the communities that
y promover
develop their
aquellas que
pastoral
aún no lo han hecho
work and
la
promote
incorporación.
that
Y por
the
último,
creation in those that have
continuar
not
y
have not
profundizar
done
el
so.
ejemplo de
And
las
finally, to
órdenes
continue
religiosas
and get deeper
femeninas y
into the
masculinas
example
que
set
están
by
participando de
some
manera
religious
activa en acciones
female
de
and male religious
desinversión
orders
de
that are
sustancias en
participating in
empresas
different active
extractivas,
manners
con
in
una
actions of
postura crítica frente a la práctica de
defunding the
décadas de un
finances of
activismo
extractive
de recursos como
businesses
activistas comunitarias de empresas
with the
en el
critical
área de la
positions
tierra.
regarding
Este
a practice
activismo que con buena
uh,
intención,
of
porque buscaba
decades of
influir en la
religious
toma de
activism
decisiones de las
as
asambleas de las empresas para
stakeholders
desarrollar
that are
esas
minoritary
repetidas y
stakeholders, part of the
mentirosas
members that are affecting
negocios
the
de empresas verdes
environment.
y sus
Although
inversores.
with very
El
good intention and
impacto
with
de
good
este
faith, because
activismo
many of them
religioso puede ser
influence that the
cuestionado
decision
porque ha
making,
sido muy reducido.
but in order
Más
to
bien se
challenge the
recomienda
rhetorics of the
que las
green
congregaciones
businesses
recuperen
and
su
their
autonomía para dar espacio a las
investors,
víctimas de la
so
transición
that impact has been
energética.
reduced. And better than that, then I'll continue with the promotion of such
En segundo
activities.
lugar,
In the second
también
place,
tenemos
also,
otras tres
we all
recomendaciones,
have
otro
other
grupo de
three
recomendaciones. Primero, y
another
esto es
group
muy
of
importante
recommendations.
para el derecho al
And this is
acceso
very
a la
important
tierra,
for
y
the
es que la
right to
Iglesia
access to earth,
Católica
and it is
debe
that the
revisar el
Catholic
esquema
Church
de la
has to
propiedad sobre las
review
tierras
the
que
state of
desde la
over
colonia
the
fueron
lands that
expropiadas
from
por
colonial times were
regímenes
expropriated
portugués y
by
español
the
para
Portuguese and
dárselos a la
Spanish
Iglesia Católica y que se la
regimes to give them
devuelvan a
to the
comunidades y
church
pueblos
and
indígenas
to
en
return
diversos
those
países de América
lands
Latina y el Caribe
to their
que aún hoy
the
en día
original owners,
mantienen formas
peasants
latifundistas
and
de economía
and
capitalista
indigenous
con
peoples,
el fin de ofrecer
uh,
fórmulas a los
because they
estados con
continue
recursos
having
suficientes que la
latifund
Iglesia
economic
ofrezca en
capitalism
venta
with the purpose of
usufructo
offering
por el
more
campesinado y los
formulas
pueblos
to the
afrodescendientes e indígenas estas
concerned
tierras
states for
que
selling and
porque estas
using by
personas
the
están en
peasants and
condiciones de
Afro-descendants and
vulnerabilidad
indigenous people
y
because they
hacer
are in
esto
a condition of
permitiría que
vulnerability.
puedan
And
tener
if you do this,
finalmente
you would
títulos de
allow
propiedad
to have
sobre esas tierras.
property
En
rights over
segundo
those
lugar,
lands.
mantener un
Second, to
papel
maintain
destacado en la respuesta
important role
humanitaria
of the
y en
humanitarian
las acciones
response
dirigidas a
and
mitigar
the
los daños
actions that are
causados
directed
por
to
los
mitigate the
desastres
damages
causados
created by the
por la
disasters caused
asimetría
by
de
the
poder
asymmetry
entre
of
las
power
empresas y
between
agentes
businesses and
estatales o
state agents
gubernamentales
or governmental
frente a las
agents
comunidades afectadas,
in front of
promoviendo
the
la caridad
communities affected,
social,
promoting the Christian
ofreciendo sus propias
charity,
sedes o
offering their own
instalaciones para alojar a los
venues
damnificados o
to favor or
favoreciendo un
helping
sentido
the
de
people who have been
comunión
affected,
con la
and
naturaleza
also
y
with a
sus
sense of
prójimos.
common union or communion
Asimismo,
for nature
apoyar
and
la apropiación
the
de las
neighbors, and also to
enseñanzas
support the
papales y de la
appropriation
Iglesia en
of
general
Pope
para
and
el
the
cuidado de
church
la casa
teachings in
común,
general
bien
for the
sea
care of a common
aprovechando las
home,
celebraciones de santos
be
patronos
it
como
as
San
taking
Francisco
the
de Asís, San
celebrations of
José y
patron saints such as San Francisco de Asís and San Jose and others that introduce elements of environmental education and to sensitize a wider audience to continue working with the associations based on faith. And finally, we also make some suggestions to organizations, members of Pax Christi International. First of all, as a Catholic movement for peace, Pax Christi International has a mission to call for attention around the close relationship between the climate crisis, the proliferation of nuclear wars and wars in the world, with the urgent need to act to mitigate and prevent the damages, environmental damages associated with the business of war. As we mentioned, the COP16 in Cali, the war produces damages through weapons that are, for example, weapons that did not exploit the massive use of chemical issues that affect the soil and the earth and the water and destroy the infrastructure of population. The second point is that with the experience developed by the Latin American program of the Caribbean around the campaigns for the right of water, the diverse support of different organizations that are fighting against extractivism, it is fundamental to get deeper into the sense of movement, to share learnings, to identify strategic allies, and to implement action plans that simultaneously can strengthen organizations, base organizations that are part of Pax Christi International, with actions of advocacy, local advocacy, national advocacy, international advocacy, and permanent accompaniment to the affected communities by the extractivism. And the third place, we suggest respectfully to organize an annual event in Latin American, Caribbean areas that allow the members of the Pax Christi International movement to share experiences around the environment. With NGOs, with the scholar sectors, preferably with schools, universities that are directed by Catholic organizations, and expert people with emphasis on institutions and programs of construction of peace and active nonviolence that can make suggestions on the role of communities and the civil society, organized civil society, facing the climate crisis and the conflict, the social environmental conflicts in the context of energy transitions. Those three recommendations, we think are very important for the future. With this, I finish my presentation. Thanking you very much for your attention.
Amanda, muchas gracias
Amanda, thank you
por
very much
esta
for
investigación
this research.
bastante cuidadosa,
It's
exhaustiva,
been
que
very careful
nos
and
ayuda en
exhaustive
este
that
camino de
is
encontrar
helping us in finding
precisamente propuestas, soluciones
ways or
alternativas
solutions,
a las
alternative
actuales
solutions to
crisis.
the current crisis.
Aprovechando el
Taking
tiempo,
advantage of time,
voy entonces a
I am
darle
going to
ya el
invite
paso a nuestro primer
now
comentarista,
our first
Bladimir Martínez. Es un honor para nosotros
person making
tenerlo
comments,
aquí
Mr.
por su
Martinez. It is a pleasure to
participación.
have you
Él
here
es indígena
today.
Aimara,
He's an
integrante del equipo
Aimara
técnico de la
Indigenous, and
red
he's
Muqui
part of the
del Perú.
technical organization in
Bladimir,
Peru.
adelante.
Vladimir, go ahead.
Muchas gracias, Alejandro.
Thank you, Alejandro.
Amanda,
Amanda, it's been an honor to listen to you and to be here with you and to make comments about your research. It is gratifying, and before anything, I'd like to salute this possibility. There are some important elements in the text, and precisely I'd like to summarize my comments in those challenges that are so current. You can read it, but they sometimes seem to be very far, but they are, very current in our situation. I have asked if I could share my. It's going to be something really short, but I just wanted to complement my comment. So you can share your screen if you want. So it's actually four relevant elements that I'd like to highlight, and a couple of aspects that could help complement the text that, even though they have not been mentioned, they are also happening in different parts of the world, and in Peru in particular. One of them is
me parece importante resaltar y
I
es un
think it is
reto en esta
important,
llamada
and it is an
construcción hacia la
important
paz
challenge in
en
this
ese marco de las
peace building,
transiciones
in this
socioecológicas y las diferentes
framework of a social
narrativas que
ecological
existen
decisions,
y
the
esta
different narratives
crítica
that
de la
exist,
narrativa
and
de
this
desarrollo que
criticism to
hace
the
Amanda
narratives that
Romero me
Amanda
parece
presented in the text.
brillante
I
la
think it
forma
is
en
a
la que se
brilliant
hace la
way
analogía
in
y
which
cómo estas
you presented this
diferentes
criticism, and
ramificaciones del
how these
desarrollo se
different
van
branches
como
of
tejiendo y
development
entretejiendo
are getting
y
together,
caen
and
en lo
then
que
they
ahora
fall
es una
into what we
transición
call
energética que
an
no es más
energetic
que,
transition, which is
como
now no
algunos
more
dicen, una falsa solución.
a fake, a false
Entonces,
solution.
estas narrativas
So these
de
narratives
desarrollo
of development
buscan
that
hegemonizar una
try
forma
to
de vida, una sola
give
forma
him
de vida donde el consumo, la
hegemony
necesidad de
to the
comprar
place where
celulares nuevos
consumption, the need
cada
to
año,
buy mobiles
viajes
every year,
fuera del país, o
to
sea,
fly
una vida de
overseas,
lujo,
a
donde el
luxury life,
consumo es el
where
elemento
our
principal,
consumption is the
pareciera
main
como
element. It's
estandarizarse
like
en el mundo, ¿no?
the one that is
Y esta
standard in the world.
transición, como
And
bien
this
la plantea
transition,
Muqui,
as
no es
mentioned by Amanda,
transitar hacia
is
una
not really
forma
moving
diferente de
to a
vida, sino
different way of living,
simplemente a
but
cambiarlo.
actually
Ya
is
no es
actually change.
un carro que
It's not
funciona
only
con
a car
gasolina o
that
petróleo,
works with
ahora es un
gas or
carro
petrol,
eléctrico, ¿no?
it's now an
Entonces,
electric car.
estas discusiones de
So this
narrativas
discussion of the narratives,
o esta narrativa de
or
desarrollo
this
ecológico
narrative
como
of
hegemonizar
development
una
that
sola
are
forma de
trying
vida,
to
no
give
ataca el
a
problema de
prevalence to a
fondo,
certain kind
que
of
es el
way of living,
consumo en
and the
realidad,
other
la
one that
forma de vivir.
has
Y existen
definitely
pueblos, y esta es un
consumption is
balance
there.
bastante
And
importante
this is a very important thing because
sobre
there
cómo se
are
vive allá,
people, so
donde están los
that
principales responsables de la
and people,
contaminación, ya no se
how
señalan, ¿no?
do
Europa,
people in
Estados
those
Unidos
places,
históricamente y en los
like
últimos
the
años
United
China,
States and China,
y
how
cómo
do
se
they
vive
live
allá
there,
y cómo vivimos
and
del otro
how
lado,
we
¿no?
live here?
Entonces, calefacción y otra
The
serie
heating
de
systems
aparatos
and
eléctricos que se
a
requieren
lot
para
of other
en el otro lado del
gadgets, electric
mundo que
gadgets in the other
no
side of the world
son
that
posibles
we
aquí
don't
muchas veces en este
need, or
lado del
sometimes they are
mundo,
not
¿no?
possible or necessary in
Entonces
this
se
part of the world.
sostiene una transición
So
allá a
they
costo que
are
vuelta de
promoting
territorios
a transition
en el
in
lado
the
del sur,
global
¿no?
north
Una cuestión que me
at the
parece
expense of
importante
the
resaltar
global
también
south.
es
And
que
something that is
estas
very important to
narrativas
highlight
llegan
is
de
that these
diferentes
narratives
formas. En
come
el
from
caso
different forms.
peruano, por
In the
ejemplo,
Peruvian case, for example,
TikTok,
TikTok,
Facebook, la televisión,
Facebook, and television,
Twitter, el
and
X se
Twitter
han convertido en
have
herramientas
become
masivas
massive
para generar
tools to
pensamiento
generate
único. Por ejemplo, en el Perú se
ways of
dice
thinking.
que el Perú es
For
un
example, in
país
Peru,
minero, netamente
we are
minero. No
saying that
somos
Peru is a
agrícolas, no somos
mining
ganaderos,
country.
no
We are
somos
not agricultural.
turísticos. A veces Machu Picchu parece quedar en segundo
We're not
plano,
even touristic.
pero el
Like
Perú es
sometimes Machu
principalmente
Picchu
minero. Eso
is
lo ves
placed
en
as
los
a secondary
aeropuertos,
aspect, and you
eso
can
lo
see
ves en la
that in the
televisión, lo
airports.
ves
You
en
can
la
see that
radio y todo el
on
tiempo lo
television
ves
and the
así.
radio,
Y hay
etc.
personas que de verdad
And there are
creen que el
people
Perú
who
es
really
un país
believe that
minero, ¿no?
Peru is a
Y
mining country.
uno al leer el texto se pregunta
When you
quién
read the
está
text,
detrás de
but
esta
yeah, but who is
narrativa. Y ahí
behind
se
that
menciona
alternative?
a los grupos de poder y
And
la
then you
captura
talk about the
corporativa,
power groups, the
cómo
corporate
ellos,
capture,
detrás de todas
how
estas
they,
narrativas, van
behind those
tejiendo también
narratives, have been
relaciones,
knitting
van
some relations
fortaleciendo su
and
presencia en el
strengthening their
Estado
presence in the
y van
states,
alineando la
and also
intervención
aligning their
hacia
intervention
sus intereses.
that
Esos
is
intereses que
congruent with their
buscan pues
interests. And
extraer
those interests
minerales
try
para estas
to
llamadas
extract
transiciones
minerals for
energéticas.
the
Yo en
energetic
este punto
transitions.
me voy a
In
permitir
this point, I'm
poner
just
unas
going
dos
to put a
imágenes súper
couple of
cortas para resumir un
images
poco cómo se
to
ven estas dos
summarize
narrativas,
how
porque yo
these
creo
two
que hay dos
narratives
formas de
look,
contar la historia.
because I think that there are two ways
Una
of
de ellas es donde la
narrating this.
transición es
One of them
como
is where the
positiva. He escuchado
narration
muchos
is very positive.
otras personas hablar de la transición de
We have
forma
heard
positiva.
people
El lado
talk
de las
about the
minas, por
active
ejemplo,
transitions, for example,
las
regarding
empresas
the
mineras
mines.
tienen su narrativa de
The
transición.
mining companies
Y la
have their
otra,
own
que es el
narratives.
texto,
And the other one
con
is
una
the text
visión
itself,
bastante
which is
crítica
a
de
critical
lo que
vision
significaría
of
una
what it
transición
means to have
en términos más reales.
that kind of transition in
Eh,
more real
les voy a
terms.
compartir brevemente
Very
esta
briefly, I'm going to
pantalla,
share my
¿no?
screen
Ustedes lo que
for
van
a
a ver
moment.
aquí de manera
What you're going to
concisa
see
es
here
un diario de
is
circulación nacional en el
is
Perú.
a
Lo que
journal
plantea esta
that
narrativa es que
is
estos
publishing at the national
agricultores que
level.
han protestado contra el
What they're
proyecto
saying is that
minero en
this
Arequipa y Amarí el año 2015 son
sorry,
unos
with these farmers that
ingenieros, y la otra cara, la
fighting
versión
against a
sacalense, fue
transition,
que
they are
ellos
considered
son
anti-mining,
violentos, no son para
and the
nada
other side is
pacíficos,
that
que
they
dice
present them
la
as
nota, ¿no? Ellos son
violent. They don't
violentos y
show
tienen
them as
armas en la
somebody
mano, como
peaceful.
ustedes ven
They
ahí.
say that they
La
have
policía está
weapons.
sosteniendo una
The
especie de
policeman is
arma de púas inflables.
like
Y yo voy a mostrar
some kind
brevemente
of pikes
este
as
video,
weapons. And this
que
video,
muestra cómo
particular
se
video
llega a
that that show how they get to this image. You can see this the person who doesn't have anything in the hand, and then the police ends up putting this thing in his hand. So the picture is taken, and then they say that they are against the minds and they are violent and they are not peaceful. So the first challenge is precisely this, to fight these narratives, because in the world we have the two. And in this moment, as Amanda mentioned, this conservative that people who are resisting are terrorists and they don't know what to do with their common goods that they have. And that narrative is a very huge risk, and it is something that we need to keep our eyes open regarding those narratives. I know that I have very little things. That the second thing that I wanted to highlight was the energy transition too. And in all of these elements of more hegemonic narrative that tries to impose a way of thinking, in the Peruvian case, that Peru is a mining country, and in other places maybe they have something similar, the transition arrives as that benefit, as that kind of green zones, because now they're not green zones, they are sacrifice zones. Now this transition says is they tell the communities, leave your territories because we have a crisis in the world. So they basically tell what is happening in the world. And now the business and extractivist models go there. They tell the communities, you have to move because we have an emergency to attend. And they say that this is public interest and national interest. And now they are not only saying it's not only national but global interest, because they want to save the world in theory. Now those are mining companies, the green companies that really want to extract the copper so that China and Europe and the United States can continue using it for the transition. So this is like a kind of a blessing for them. They adopted their discourse, and they feel, the communities begin to feel that they are saving the world of something that they did not produce. In this sense, how can you perceive the energy transition, how they are now attempting to be the Messiah? And something that is really important to highlight is that in Peru, we had a diagnosis on how this transition is being perceived. And in many cases, the blame is taken by the communities themselves, communities that are far away from. So they say sometimes they think that they are to blame because of the situation at the moment, but actually the narratives that are being distributed is that you are the one to blame, and in that sense, the real responsible people sometimes are not included in narratives. So who is responsible of these things that are happening, and what are the efforts that are being taken, if that they are sufficient? And just to close with the third element that I wanted to mention, had to do with this tendency that is presented in the text regarding the conflicts. Water conflicts we are experiencing that in Piura, for example. In Peru, we are experiencing that at the moment. There's no water. So there's a mining project like Rio Blanco, despite the conditions, the climate conditions, want to impose this project. And they say, I'm going to produce a water project, but in theory. So these climate crises now are becoming opportunities to think about projects that were not viable before. Rio Blanco in this moment, this topic of the climate crisis, it's really current, and we are experiencing that every day. We have mining companies like in Muqui and formal businesses that are operating upstream, and they end up leaving the populations without water downstream. And the situation in gender issues, how this gender violence has also is associated with the system. Every time that the system is consolidated, it seems as if this grows and promotes gender-based violence. As I think those three challenges are still there. And two questions that I wanted to present. One for the committees is one of the challenges of the transition that I think is important is this new aspect of the mining communities. In Peru, we have seen that communities that have rejected community activities, and now they are turning and they are having, they are performing mining activities of copper, and in some cases of gold. So that is a tendency that is being experienced in Peru. This moment, there's a whole discussion in Peru about the small scale and large scale mining, and that's been a discussion now because of the prices at the moment. And the second case that I wanted to present is with the role of the NGOs, the church, and other actors that are working together with the peoples are very important to compile information, to denounce the facts, not to replace the voice of the territories, but to amplify those voices. And I think that that's a very important role. And something that I want to suggest as a concern in this point is that in the Peruvian case, for example, I don't know what happens in other countries, is that there is like a renewed attack to close NGOs, to harass them. And it is clear that this narrative of a mining country does not mean criticism, does not be criticism. And the tendency is that the governments that are coming, the way they are installing in this general context, it takes us to a tendency towards the silencing of these critical voices, which can be bothering sometimes for this dominant system at the moment. That's Amanda. Thank you very much for allowing me this
Muchas
space.
gracias,
Thank you,
Vladimir, por
Vladimir,
el
and
tiempo de
all
la
the
red Muqui y
technical
nuestros
the Muqui
comentarios.
network for these
Efectivamente, esa
comments.
situación
Pretty sad this
de la
situation
presión hacia las
of
ONGs
the
se
pressure
viven en
against
otras
NGOs
latitudes,
is
también
experienced
en
in different
Paraguay
places. In
se
Paraguay,
encuentra en la misma
they are
situación.
in the same situation.
Voy a darle
I am
paso
going to
inmediatamente al
allow
Padre
now
Dario Bossi,
Father Dario Bossi,
comboniano brasileño,
Comboniano
integrante
priest,
de la
who
red de
is
minas y
a part
minería,
of the
y un hermano más.
network of
Padre Dario,
mining and
adelante.
church. So, Father, go
Muchísimas
ahead.
gracias, Alejandro.
Thank you very much,
Felicitaciones
Alejandro, and
a
congratulations
Amanda por
to
el
Amanda
informe
for the
y gracias
report.
a Bladimir también por
Thank you
esta
for Vladimir
contextualización
for this,
muy
given this context
provocaciones, muy
that
lindo.
generates a lot of think
Quería decir
provoking.
que
Um,
este webinario es una
this
gran
webinar
invitación a
is a
leer con
great
mucha
invitation
atención
to
el
read
informe.
carefully
Yo
the
también lo
report
he encontrado
because
muy
I have
claro.
also found it very
Como he reconocido
rich.
bastante,
And I have
es como
learned a
que
lot
una
of things.
compilación
It's like
de
there is a
muchas
compilation of
estrategias.
different strategies.
Yo al leerlo
When I
he
read
visto mucho de lo
this,
que
I have
nuestras
seen many
comunidades
of
han
the things
vivido
that our
también
experiences have, our
en
communities
diversos
have
niveles.
experienced
Se
at
habla
different
mucho de
levels.
la
Um,
multiescalaridad de la
there are
lucha
like a
como por
multi-scaling of the
una
situation,
nivel más de base,
like
conectados con
base
los otros niveles,
situation connected
ayuda a
with
la
other levels,
fuerza, a la
and that
resistencia.
gives strength to this
Yo quería,
situation. So I
en
wanted
unos
to
minutos,
take this a
hablar
few minutes
un poquito del
to
contexto que
talk about the
lleva a este
context that
tipo de informes
is
y de
taking us to these kinds of
exigencias.
reports
Y
and the
después
resistances.
destacar tal
And
vez
after
tres
that,
cuestiones
then
clave
to
que me
highlight
parecen.
three key
Me
aspects
siento muy en línea con Bladimir,
in line with
y
what the
voy
Bladimir
a repetir
mentioned.
algo que él
And
ya
maybe
ha
I
dicho.
will repeat myself.
Estamos en un contexto de
We are in a
elevación
context
de los
of
conflictos, incluso
the escalation of
descarga de
conflicts,
los conflictos sobre
of
los más
discharge of conflicts over
empobrecidos,
the poorest
personas
peoples and
y madre tierra.
communities and Mother Earth.
Porque estamos en una situación de
Because
colapso
we
del
are in a
capitalismo
collapse,
que
a
está
capitalist
llegando a
collapse moment,
su gran
that it's getting
contradicción. Un
to
sistema que
a
por
highest
definición
contradiction, a
existe
system that
y
by
cree que se puede
definition
extender,
exists
expandir.
in the
El capitalismo está a la
as it
base
can be
de la
extended,
colonia, de la
because
militarización que todavía hoy
this is in the basis of colonialism,
vivimos,
militarization,
pero que está llegando
but
a
it's
los
also getting
límites de esta expansión.
to the limits of that expansion,
Obviamente no
because
existe
obviously
ningún sistema
there are
infinito
no
dentro de un planeta
infinite systems in the
infinito.
planet, finite
Así
planet.
que le sobran dos
So
posibilidades
there
al
are only two
capitalismo en este
possibilities in the
momento.
capitalism this
O
moment,
declarar
or
guerra
either
a
they
los
declare a war
empobrecidos que
to
intentan
the
levantarse
poor are trying
para
to
garantizar
raise
sus
to
derechos,
guarantee their rights,
o
or
declarar guerra a la madre
to
tierra,
declare the war to the
avanzando cada
mother
vez
earth,
más
making
para
it
intentar mantener
more
un mínimo
difficult
de
just to be
niveles
able
de
to have
distribución
a minimum of
que apague
distribution that can calm the demands of people that are those who are implementing and promoting this great injustice. And these two wars are very clearly described in the report that Amanda presented. I am really impressed by the fact that the title talks about peace, but what kind of peace is possible when you have two declarations of war at the moment?
Casi que está en sus límites. Bladimir bien hablaba
Vladimir talks about
por
of
ejemplo,
how, for example, this new way or trend to look into mining in function of capitalism
hasta el 2040 a la necesidad de casi 4 veces más
to
los
be able to
mineros
afford more
críticos que
time
estamos
mining,
utilizando ahora. Entonces,
more.
entendemos cuánto los
Sorry, that we are using that
consumidores
almost
de
4
estos
times
productos
more
diferentes. Por
resources at the
ejemplo,
moment
en
that they
Amanda
used before.
se
So
destina
what
a
Amanda presented
amplificar
before
el consumo, la
is
criminalización
meant
de
to
que Bladimir
identify
estaba
these aspects.
hablando. Y es muy importante lo que
And it is
dice
very
Bladimir,
important what
porque
Vladimir
no se
said,
puede
that you
culpabilizar a
cannot
todos de la misma
blame
manera, porque
everybody in the
quería
same manner.
conectarme un
And I
poco
wanted
con
to connect this
lo
with
que dice Papa Francisco en la
something that
Laudato
Pope
Deum,
Francis says in the Laudato
exhortación
Deum,
sobre el clima,
in exhortation of the
cuando
climate, when
cuando hace los nombres
he talks about the
responsables,
names of
tanto a nivel de
responsible
estados
people,
como de
both at the level of
empresas.
states and
Entonces,
businesses.
hay diversidad de
There is a
responsabilidades
diverse
en el enfrentamiento que
responsibility in
necesitamos
facing the
todos
situation that
seguir
we are experiencing at
llevando.
the moment.
Estamos en este sentido
At the moment,
en una
we
crisis
are in a
de
crisis
reacciones,
of
de organización,
reactions,
porque estos dos actores que
because
son los
these
que más
actors that are
atacan
the ones
a
that
los
are attacked the
desfavorecidos de los
most
territorios
to the poor people and the territories
buscan
are looking into,
también en nosotras y nosotros,
also amongst us,
organizaciones de la sociedad
organizations,
civil,
civil
iglesias,
society, church,
como representamos aquí,
as
lo
we represent
dijiste en
here,
primera persona,
uh,
buscan como que si fuéramos mediadores del
as we
conflicto,
were mediators,
árbitros neutros del
like
conflicto
neutral
con
referees
algunos
in
arriba
conflicts
de
that
los
are provoked by
puentes, de
others
otros de los territorios en que vivimos.
that are affecting the
La
territories at the moment.
transición que se
So
hace
the
hacia
solution
las
that is presented
organizaciones
towards
gubernamentales y las iglesias para que
the
sean
NGOs and the churches
mediadores
to be
neutros
mediators
de responsabilidades
of
que son
responsibilities
evidentemente
that
de
are
una
clearly
parte, es
one
muy
of the
peligrosa
parts
porque
of the parties is
jurídicamente
very dangerous because
abandonar nuestra
we
pertenencia,
sometimes they ask us to
nuestra
abandon
opción por
our
las víctimas
options for the victims
en búsqueda de un
in
árbitro
search of some kind of a
aparte. Entonces,
referee that is not our
esto
role.
bastante
So this is
complejo
a context that's very common to what we're
Ahora
experiencing at the
quería
moment.
traer
Now, I wanted to
tres
bring
cuestiones clave.
three specific
Una,
aspects. The
dialogando
first
bastante con
one,
Vladimir.
I've spoken a
Una es
lot today.
que,
One is,
como muchas otras narrativas,
as many
está
other
englobando
narratives,
también la narrativa de la
this is
transición.
also
Lo
mentioning the narrative of
apuntábamos y
transition.
Amanda lo ha dicho
Amanda
muy bien.
mentioned this very clearly
Por ejemplo, cuando hablábamos del
when
proceso
we
hacia
talk about
el
the process
post-extractivismo,
towards
es decir, como
post-extractivism.
una
So,
utopía, como un horizonte,
like
como
a
una
horizon, like
perspectiva
a
de
perspective
radical cambio,
of a radical
cuáles
change
serían las
to define which
transiciones
would be the
necesarias en
transitions
esa
that are
dirección.
necessary in this
Pero
direction.
ahora
But
el uso
now,
de la transición
the use
se
of
vuelve como que en un círculo cerrado y
these
vicioso para
narratives, it
seguir
becomes like a vicious circle
en la manutención
to
del mismo sistema.
continue maintaining
Entonces,
the same system.
transitar para no
So
salir
to
de lo que
transit,
está garantizando la vida de
but in
todos,
circles, not
el
to
lucro
really
de
change
pocos.
those things that are
Nos
affecting
está
the
robando
lives of
también
many
la
people. So they
perspectiva
are
de
stealing
las
our perspective
transiciones.
of the
Y es por
transitions.
eso que nosotros,
And it is for
en
that
el momento
reason
para
that
no caer
now,
en
in
las
order not
falsas
to fall
soluciones,
into those fake
hablamos de
solutions, are now
transformación,
talking about
es decir, del real
transformations
cambio. El Papa
of a real
Francisco
change.
también
Pope
lo
Francis says that
llama la
he
revolución
calls them
cultural.
the
O sea,
cultural
no es solo
revolution.
un
It's not
cambio
only a
técnico,
the technical
un
change.
ajuste
It's not just an adjustment
puntual de la
of
estructura, sino
specific
que
aspects of a
una
structure,
transformación
but it's a real
profunda,
transformation, a profound
digamos,
transformation
del
of the
metabolismo de nuestra sociedad,
metabolism
de la
of our
manera de
society,
ritmo,
metabolism of our
de
society,
los valores
of our values
de nuestra sociedad, de
in our
este
society,
ciclo, ¿no? Que
of
es un
this
ciclo de
cycle,
extraer,
which is as
consumir y
extractive,
descartar, que
to
queremos quebrar
consume
para
and
que se
discard
transforme en un
and
ciclo
waste, and we
de
really
buena
wanted to turn it into
revitalización.
something
Es
different.
esto que estamos,
This is what
a
we are
esto que
trying
tenemos que
to do. This is where we have to
evolucionar.
get to.
En este
In that sense, the second question that I wanted, the second aspect that I wanted to present in the report, but as Bladimir said, we run the risk because of the narratives of also that interject ourselves into this, is the danger of limiting ourselves to what is called the energetic transitions, as if they were the only urgent need and solution to the crisis today. So we are talking about this webinar of a wider transformation. These are thinking about socio-ecological changes, not only energetic. This is very important because much of the narrative today is that once you do the energy transition, then we're going to have all the problems are going to be solved. That's not true. It's a whole system that needs to be transformed. And the third thing is that we are in a profound reconfiguration process of capitalism that precisely because of not wanting to yield, it's trying to reinvent itself based on the opportunities that are coming up in this moment of the false solutions that they present as present themselves again as protagonists in a change that they cannot lead. In that, the Pope Francis says that the biggest protagonists of change are you, the ones that are the excluded ones, the people who have been forgotten, because you are the ones that a profound spirituality, a different concept of the destructive cycle that has been implemented. In that sense, I think it's important to be vigilant and aware of not falling into the trap of this kind of reconfiguration, where we could eventually be accomplices or if we don't have enough criticism. With this, I'd like to just I would like to highlight that I like the two strategies that are proposed by Amanda. The first one is the internal autonomy democracy, and I connect myself with the great principle of the right to say no, the right to reaffirm your own solutions and your own life plans, which are not an alternative, but it's a permanent development of a model that you cannot detach us from. And the second thing I want to mention the dimension that we promote in the idea of eco spiritualities. There is no relation with the territory if there is no profound spirituality that roots us, that allows to create memory and connection with our ancestors and a perspective of new generations. Spirituality as something that roots us into the land. And the second dimension is the identification of the advocacy actors with which the churches have a very relevant role, because it's a multi-scale actor that is present in different territories, but also has an international institutional organization. And to think also the idea of defunding as a direct criticism, because everything is being refinanced nature. So to end up with the logics of and to get away from those funds that are what is killing the territories, it is a strategy, and it is also a denounce of a vision. It's a view of ideology that we need to abandon in order to accept a new one, a way of organizing our relation and our resistances. Thank you very much.
Padre Dario,
Thank you, Father
por
Dario,
sus
Father Dario,
apuntes,
for those points
interesantes que tiene esta
and the points that
investigación,
you highlight in
por
this
esas
research,
recomendaciones que
and for those
seguramente
recommendations
vamos a
that
seguir
we're
nutriendo,
going
porque
to
esa es la
continue
intención,
nourishing, because that
abrir una
is
apertura, un
precisely
diálogo
of this
como lo han
purpose of this
venido
dialogue.
comentando,
As
agradeciéndoles
you
todos
have
los
been
comentarios
commenting, I
que han
would like
hecho en
to
el
thank
Zoom,
you all the comments that have been
precisamente
made in the Zoom
de manera
and
propositiva de todas
like
las iniciativas
proposals of the
que
different initiatives
genera, nos
that
inspiran
are
esta
generated
reflexión.
and that are
Les
provide this inspiration. Now I open the floor to Marta
Diputado
Romero,
América
the
Latina y
coordinator for Latin America
General de
and
Pax Christi
General Secretary
International.
General of Pax Christi
Muchas gracias.
International. Thank you very much. This has been extremely important. I'd like very quickly share like the main ideas that have come up with this from the three people who have participated today. The first thing is about the research. As mentioned by Padre Dário, this model is no longer sustainable, and there are different perspectives that are disputing in this public sphere, but also in the private sphere, in the terms of narratives, the tensions, and the fake news. On one hand is the growth and the versus the post-structivism, which is seen from transitions based on good living. And what is the importance of the recommunalize, and which is the value of a value that is given to the what is local community, but also articulated with the global, because that's where the resistances are based on for socio-ecological transitions, but also the importance of being or having an eye on the articulation with the global. It wouldn't be possible to listen to the voices of victims in the communities with the resisting communities if it is not under the base of an articulation with the global. And the pluriverse, which is mentioned by one of the authors mentioned by Amanda, related to what Pope Francis mentions about Laudate Deo, about the multilateralism from bottom up. These are the 8 R's that have been included also, but also in the capacity building proposals. And the last two things are regarding what Amanda mentioned. First is a political advocacy towards political and action about people who are policymakers at the national and local levels and at regional levels in Escazú, but also at the global levels on issues of business and human rights, but also to the inside of the church. We could mention Padre Dário, to the churches, to sensitize, but also to act. There are many dioceses with ecological pastorals and with the integral ecology routes with Laudate Deum that is including the CELAC, to which many of us are part of. The Muqui network, which has been very active in Peru, but also inside the communities, the issue of what is accompanied from those of us who are outside, which is this emancipatory fight that has to be contextualized with the specific elements of an political analysis that has to be inclusive in terms of gender and intergenerational, and that necessarily has to be collective. From the reactions to the research, on one hand, the call by Bladimir to identify, neutralize those fake narratives are fake solutions, to identify the greenwashing, that's like the cleaning up of images that show transition as a benefit, and that are issues of national interest that we need to impact on territories that have communities that take care of them. And then to identify those real responsible people, or the people who are responsible for the environmental deterioration thanks to the mining transition that they are performing, that we need to resist and act. And the research identifies community experiences, and this is very important. It is also mentioned by Dario. It is to give visibility and to give resistance strength to the resistance. And the context is of conflict increase. It is challenges for the construction of peace, because it is perceived that there is a collapse of the capitalist model, so that there is two war declarations, to communities and to Mother Earth, and how these can be proposed based on a key of resistance. And finally, the issue of Laudate Deum that calls for the identification. That's why on differentiated responsible people on the damage. Communities don't have to lead with this burden. The churches, and this is something that is very important because we have some very good faith initiatives to mediate the dialogue between communities and businesses. We are not neutral. We have no option. We actually go for the ones that are poorest and the ones that are affected. As we have said, that many of the topics that we have alluded in our topics have been co-opted. They are also stealing the narratives. So there are businesses and states that are promoting those transitions and fair justice and non-inclusive polluting narratives. So we need to talk about the transformations from that point of view. What Pope Francis talks about, that is, he calls cultural transformation. The energy transition is not the most important, or it's not the only one. So it is very important to continue working of socio-ecological transformations. We're going to include this in the we're going to continue developing this focus because we're talking about some socio-ecological transformations. We are in process of profound reconfiguration of this capitalism that is reinvented, and for that reason, we have to be attentive. We have to be alert because there's a whole movement in social networks that tries to distract and damage the idea of this reconfiguration. And two last ideas, it is the most vulnerable and the most affected ones where the transitions, social-ecological transitions are experienced in internal autonomy democracy. That is something that is well developed in the research, and the issue of their own life plans, from their own cosmovisions in accompanying from what those of us who have this option. And finally, the issue of defunding. We need to continue working on these logics of funding as if it were the solution that we are experiencing at the moment in these times of transitions. So that's my summary. So we proceed with the final reflections and reactions.
Muchas gracias, Martínez,
Thank you,
por esta
Martínez,
síntesis.
for this synthesis.
Las perspectivas que se han
The
logrado
perspectives that have been mentioned at the moment.
podemos entonces
How can we
encontrar ahí estos caminos.
find those
Le doy
roads?
nuevamente la palabra a Amanda
Now
Romero
I'm
para
going to
que
give a
nos
word for
comparta
Romanda
entonces
to
una
share
reflexión
with
final
us
a
a
partir de
final
estos
reflection
comentarios.
based on their comments.
Muchas gracias,
Thank
Alejandro y
you very much,
Martita.
Alejandro and
Gracias,
Martha.
Padre
Thank
Dario.
you, Padre
Gracias,
Dario.
Bladimir, por
Thank you,
sus
Vladimir,
maravillosos
for your
comentarios.
marvelous comments.
Nos enfrentamos
We
a
are
un reto
facing
mayor
a
aún
major challenge
hasta
still,
este año con la llegada del
that up to
presidente
this year,
Trump a los
with the
Estados
arrival
Unidos.
of President Trump
Va
to
a
the
ser
presidency of the
una
United States.
situación
This is
mucho
going to
más
be a much
demandante de
more
nuestras
demanding
energías,
situation in
nuestra
regards to our
capacidad
energies and
realmente
capacities
de
of
reaccionar y mantener
reacting
esta
and
construcción
maintaining
desde
this
lo local y
construction
desde
from the
abajo.
local and
Me
from the
parece
bottom up.
súper importante
It is
también
really important
señalar que
to
los
point
próximos
out that
40 años
in the following
los
40
países del
years,
norte van a querer
the
extraer
global
y
north
acabar con
countries are going to
recursos
try
como el
to
litio, el
extract
cobre o
resources like
todos los
lithium, copper,
minerales a
and
nuestro
other
poder con el
minerals,
argumento de la
with the
necesidad
argument
de la
that there is a
transformación.
need
Yo les
for
invito
ecological,
entonces
for
a
the
leer el
energy
informe.
transition. So I invite you
Hubiese
to read
querido que fuera mucho más
the
largo,
report. I
pero
would have
luego no
wanted to
teníamos
have it
espacio. Así
longer,
que
but
es un
actually there was not
informe
so
que
much
va a
space.
servir
But it is
también
a
para
report that is going
continuar
to help
profundizando. Creo que la
getting deeper into
posibilidad
these
de
topics,
esos
and
cambios
the possibility for
culturales
these cultural
toman más
changes
tiempo,
will take
pero
more
son
time,
más
but
necesarios.
are
Van
more necessary.
acompañados de una
They are
postura
accompanied by
antipatriarcal,
anti-patriarchal,
anticolonialista
anti-colonial
y desde las
perspectives,
comunidades
and from
y
the
desde lo
communities
local.
and
Creo
from the
que ahí es
local
como mi
views.
resumen de
And
lo que
that
yo
is like
quise
my summary of
transmitir
what I
y
wanted to
agradecerle
transmit.
mucho a
And I
Pax
also wanted
Christi.
to try
Yo
to
no había
thank Pax
leído ni
Christi.
Laudato
I
Si ni
hadn't
las
read
exhortaciones, así
Laudato
que fue un
Si,
ejercicio
so I think it
interesante
was a very
para
interesting exercise for
poder
me
asimilar
to
también
be able to
cómo
assimilate
desde una
how,
perspectiva
from
espiritual,
a spiritual
eclesial,
perspective,
se
ecclesial
pueden y se
perspective,
deben hacer
we
esas
should and could
transformaciones
start those
sociales y económicas,
social
no
transformations and so
solamente
ecological
de
transformations,
las
not only
energías
from
para
based on the
poder vivir.
energies
Muchísimas
to be able
gracias.
to live. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And
Voy a darle la
I'm going
palabra
to now
a
allow
Vladimir
Bladimir
nuevamente, dos
to give
minutos,
us closing remarks.
un comentario final.
Gracias,
Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you, Martha, Dario, Alejandro, and all of you who are here today. Just wanted to tell you that I am very happy to have been able to review the document. It's been like talking to you, Amanda, and there are some other aspects that are pending, but I really thank you very much for that. And it is a very important document that needs to be read in this context. And hopefully we will continue sharing it and to take us to the debates and the comments that have been shared at the moment. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Vladimir. Padre
Vladimir, with Padre Dario, thank
También
you.
agradecer mucho a
I
Pax
wanted to
Christi por
thank Pax
darnos la
Christi
oportunidad de
for this
poder informe
opportunity to
esta vez
for
más,
the
Amanda.
report, and to thank Amanda again.
Hubo muchos comentarios
There
en el
were
chat.
many comments in the
Claro,
chat.
no tenemos las
Of course, we don't
condiciones
have enough time
de
to
contestar
cover all these
todos,
questions and
pero
comments,
felicitaciones a
but
cada uno
congratulations
que
to
están en la
everybody
lucha
who
y se
participated,
ponen,
because
por
it's obvious
ejemplo,
that you are,
sugieren
you know, in
caminos o
a fight and they are
perspectivas
suggesting
muy relevantes. Una
roads
de
and very
ellas
relevant
es relación
roads.
el
One of
protagonismo
them
de
is,
los
by the way,
pueblos.
is the
Parece
protagonism
que
of the
estamos
people.
en este
I
momento
think that in this moment, in the
muy
content,
fuerte
we
el
have a
énfasis del protagonismo
strong
de los pueblos,
emphasis on
principalmente los
the
pueblos
participation of
indígenas,
the
la posición
peoples, indigenous
de
peoples, our
exponer
descendant
que no
peoples,
vamos a errar
to
de
present
dirección.
what is
Y
it
por
that's
último,
going to be
quería
our
hacer un
direction. And
llamado
finally, I
a
wanted to
todas
make
las
a call
organizaciones
to
que están
all the
acá,
organizations that are here,
vida religiosa,
the religious
TLC,
lives, and dioceses,
organizaciones
and
no gubernamentales, academia,
NGOs, the
investigadores,
academy, and
investigadoras,
researchers,
para que esta dimensión de la
to
designación
have this
sea una
idea
gran
of the
plataforma donde
defunding approach
podemos cada
becomes a
uno
huge
con su
platform where
competencia,
we,
con su también
with each one of
estilo,
us, with our
con
expertise and
su
decisions and view and information that we
presencia en el
have,
territorio, participar,
we
salir
can
de la
participate.
minería y de las
So that
falsas
to
soluciones.
be able to get
Un
out of the
testimonio muy
fake of
coherente y
solutions. We have
revolucionario.
heard about
Gracias.
some very important
Muchas
testimonies, and I think
gracias,
it
Padre
deserves
Dario.
attention to this one.
Voy
Thank
a
you, Father
destacar
Dario, and now
algunos
I'm going to read
comentarios
some
que
comments
han
that have
precisado
been
reflexiones en
included
torno a
in
lo que
the
se ha
Zoom
venido
regarding what we
conversando.
have been talking about
Dice
today.
por
So, for
aquí, bueno, hay una
example, today
invitación
there is
por
an
parte de
invitation
Constanza
by
Carvajal
Constantine
para que Amanda
Carvajal
Romero
so that Amanda
acompañe y
Romero can
pueda
accompany
compartir
and
sus
share
conocimientos
her
con los
knowledge
guardianes
with the
de la
guardians
Amazonía.
of the Andean
Precisamente andan
Amazon zone.
trabajando un proceso de
They
plan de
have been
trabajo
working on
sub-25
for the
y allí hay uno de los casos que
work plan for
acompaña también el
next year,
programa de
and
defensa
one
internacional
of the
en
plans that is
Mocoa,
accompanied by
y es
Paxton
minería
Mocoa,
de cobre
which is the
para la
copper mining
transición, ¿no? Con
for
ese, entre
transition,
comillas,
with this quote
esa
unquote
justificación.
justification.
Entonces,
And
interesante,
so this is
importante,
really
desde luego
interesting,
deseamos
and
seguir acompañando.
of course we would like to
Pedro
continue accompanying.
Sánchez dice lo
Pedro
siguiente,
Sanchez
Pedro de Church y
says,
Minería,
Pedro from Churches and Mining,
frente a la llamada transición energética, ¿cómo
regarding the
podríamos
fake, the
conformar una
false
gran alianza
energy
internacional con
transition, how
instituciones
can
que
we create
convocan
an international
instituciones
alliance that
basadas en
with
la fe,
organizations that
con
are
principios
with
éticos a
based
desinvertir en la minería
faith
extractiva?
faith-based organizations
Este llamado
with a focus on
como parte
destructives?
también de las mismas
So this
recomendaciones,
is
¿no?
one of the
Como
recommendations.
fortalecer
How can we
la
strengthen
organización, la
the
cooperación
organizations, the articulation,
y fortalecer el
and the
tejido
strengthen
de
this
tejedoras y
fabric
tejedores de la esperanza.
of netting
Por aquí hay otros
hope.
comentarios, dice
And
Azul
there are other
Montoya,
comments.
acuerdos mínimos
Ms.
para
Montaña, just
grandes
basic agreements for
transformaciones.
huge transformations.
Lina Chuaski
Lina
dice
Joaski
felicitaciones
says,
Amanda,
congratulations,
excelente
Amanda,
exposición, no
excellent
solo desde la
presentation, not
perspectiva
only from a
académica,
perspective
sino
of academic
esencialmente desde
perspective,
su
but also
posición como
from her
defensora de
position
derechos
of
humanos
human rights
y su
defender
opción por la
and
vida.
her option for life.
Asunta
And
Montoya,
Santa
bueno,
Montoya,
el comentario con las comunidades,
with
dice
the
Lina
communities,
también, muy
Lina
buenos
says also
comentarios de Vladimir
very good comments by
Martínez y el
Bladimir
padre
Martinez and
Dário
Father
Bossi,
Dario
que
Bossi
demuestran
that
también su trabajo
demonstrate
con la gente.
how well they work with people.
Y por aquí
And
tenemos
here
también
we have
un comentario
a
también de
comment
Tom Baman.
from Tom Bauman
Dice,
that
sería
says,
interesante tener
it would
estudios
be
de
interesting to
casos
have
con
case
relativo
studies
éxito, por lo
with
menos, digamos, de lo que se
case studies
está
where there has been
hablando, visibilizar
successful
también
cases
esas historias
to give
significativas
visibility
de
to those
cambio.
meaningful
Sandra Ferrero
change
dice, gracias
initiatives.
por
Sandra Ferraro says, thank you
iluminarnos,
for
seguimos
illuminating
juntos, ojalá
us.
podamos
We
conocer
continue
las
together.
resistencias desde
We
la
hope to see
visibilización y denuncia a las
how we can
empresas
work on the
en
resistances
general
in front of
anticorruptas
the
como algunos
businesses,
funcionarios.
as well as the corruption
Por
with those
aquí, Ana
governmental agents.
Siufi, muchas
And
gracias.
Sufi,
Muy
thank you very much.
importantes y
Very
claros aportes
important
para
and
seguir la
clear
resistencia a este
contributions to continued
sistema
resistance to this
capitalista
capitalist
y
system and
extractivista.
its activist.
Y bueno, creo que por
And
aquí estarían entonces los
that will be
comentarios.
some of the comments. I think that there was a comment, yeah, the right of communities to say no. It's a right to decide how to live in the present and in the future by the peoples and the communities. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Muy bien, entonces el informe lo
So
vamos
the
a estar
report we're going to
colgando en
be
nuestras redes sociales,
uploading in our
en
social
la página de
networks, in
Facebook,
the
Pax
web,
Christi
Facebook, Pax Christi
Internacional por América
International,
Latina y el
Latin
Caribe,
America, the Caribbean,
también
and
está la
also
versión en español,
the Spanish version,
también en nuestro Twitter o
and in
X,
our Twitter,
Pax Christi
Pax
América
Christi
Latina y el Caribe,
America
lo pueden
Latina, the
encontrar
Caribbean.
como
We can also
Pax Christi
Pax
LAC.
Christi LAC,
Y
LAC,
desde luego
and
también a sus correos, ya que realizaron
also
la
to your
inscripción, a
emails
sus
for those people
redes
who registered,
de WhatsApp
saying WhatsApp,
y
and
todas las comunicaciones
so
lo
all
van
the
a
possible
seguramente
communications.
tener
So you're
para
going
que
to have this
puedan
report
acceder a
so that
él
you can have
y
access to it
leerlo y
and to
reflexionar y
read it
ser
and
también
reflect
una guía
and
de
to continue
trabajo
having
de
as a
sus
guide for
organizaciones, de
your
sus procesos, porque ahí
plans, for your
precisamente están
processes in
recomendaciones
organizations and the
en
communities
temas estratégicos de
in
liderazgo.
strategic
Voy
aspects
a
of
darle la palabra a
advocacy.
Amanda.
Now,
Thank you.
Amanda,
Muchas gracias. Esto es
so
para
thank you very much.
Rosemary
This is for
Kennel.
Rosemary Kennan.
El informe tiene un
The
resumen en
report has
muy buen
the
inglés
executive
que
summary in
también
English
ustedes tendrán
that
acceso
you
a
will
él.
have access to.
Y me parece
And
muy
I think that
importante
it's
que lo
very important
compartan con
to
Canadá
share it with
y el
Canada
gobierno
and with the
canadiense, que
Canadian
eran los
government,
principales
because one of
promotores de la
it's one of
minería y de
the
los
most important promoters
combustibles
of
fósiles en
mining of
América
fossil
Latina y
fuel projects
responsable
in Latin
también
America and
de
responsible
gran
for
tragedia
huge
en
tragedies
todos nuestros países,
in
¿no?
all of our
No hay
countries.
país
There
nuestro
is
donde
no
no haya
country
inversiones
in our region
canadienses
where there are no
junto con la
Canadian
de
investments
China
that,
y
together with the
Estados Unidos,
ones
son las
from China and the
principales
United States, are the
responsables
main
de la
responsible
destrucción de
for the
nuestro
destruction
territorio.
of our
Eso
territories.
quería
So
añadir.
that's
Muchísimas
something that I
gracias.
wanted to add. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Amanda.
Thank you very much,
Muchas
Amanda.
gracias. Entonces, vamos a seguir desde luego
So we're going to
generando
continue, of
espacios
course,
de
generating
encuentro,
some
de
spaces
reflexión.
to
Este
get together
fue
and reflect.
el primer ciclo de
This was the
webinarios,
first cycle of our
lo llamamos
webinars.
así, desde el
We
grupo
call
de
them
trabajo sobre
from a
extractivas,
task group
tejiendo
on
esperanza
extractives,
en tiempos de
knitting hope
transiciones
in times of,
hacia la vida en armonía.
transitions to
Creo que
life in
hicimos un
harmony. I
bonito
think it was
ejercicio.
a great
Muchas gracias
exercise.
por la
Thank you very
participación a
much for
todas
your
las organizaciones
participation,
que
to
hacen parte.
all the people who are
Seguramente el otro
organizations
año
that are part of
podamos
this.
construir
Most sure,
otro espacio
certainly
más
next
en
year
el
we're going
que
to
desde
construct
ya,
another
desde luego,
space
están
that from now
cordialmente
you are cordially
invitados e
invited to
invitadas.
participate.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.